Norway Chess 2024 has come to an end, and we are going to take a look at the final matches between Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana that led to his victory here. A quick look at the standings if you are interested. We've got Magnus, the guy from Norway who's semi-decent at the game of chess, winning Norway Chess. I know it's shocking, but hey, surprising things happen every day. And then we've got Hikaru, Prague, Ali Reza, Fabiano, and Ding Loren, the current world champion, trailing in last place. I wish him all the best. Hope he feels better. And then we've got the women's section here, Ju and Jun, Anna Muzichuk, Lei Tingjie, Vaishali Ramesh Babu, Humpe Konaru, and Pia Kramling in that order. Apologies if I mispronounced any of those names. Now, before we jump into the games between Magnus and Fabiano, let's take a look at our daily puzzle here. So this is something new I'm going to try out. I'm going to launch this on the screen, and you guys comment below what you think the solution is. This one is a made in 3, and if you think you find it, great, comment below, and I'll give you guys a shout out in the next video when I post the next puzzle. Now, that's enough of that. You guys can pause and solve that on your own time. Let's take a look at the first game between Magnus and Fabiano. So Magnus has the white pieces in this game. And we have e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and we have a Spanish of Roy Lopez here. Now, I'm going to be honest with you guys, not much happens in this game. So we're just going to kind of go through. This is all theory, right? This has all been played before. I mean, it's pretty standard stuff. You know, black in the Spanish often plays this a6, b5 at some moment. The bishop gets kicked back, right? And, you know, both players just develop their pieces, castle their kings. We do have the a file opening up here, and, you know, we get a nice solid pawn chain, and both sides just kind of, you know, maneuver their knights over to the king side, and we have a very symmetrical game, right? You know, fairly symmetrical. We've got the pawns looking very, very similar, and here only one pair of pawns has been traded on the a file, and then, you know, no pieces have been exchanged, right? Everybody has all their pieces, both knights sitting in front of the king with the h pawn pushed one square, and, you know, we're just going to see that black just kind of activates his bishops, and Magnus just kind of strengthens the center here, and eventually we have a trade on the d file. The queens fall off the board, and the players decide to repeat moves in this position because, well, 2, 2, 1, 1, 3, 3. You got some knights, you got some rooks, you got some bishops. I'm just highlighting all the pieces, but it's fairly symmetrical, so the guys didn't want to play that classical game out here. Instead, we go to an Armageddon, which I unfortunately had the final position pulled up, but hey, we already know how it ends. So we have here knight f3, Magnus starting with the ready. I hate when people play this against me when I'm black, because I'm like, well, dang it, I prepare against e4 and d4. You play anything else, and I'm all of a sudden playing at 800 elo level. It's an exaggeration, of course, but I mean, I don't like it. Anyway, these players know what they're doing. They know every opening. So c4 here, and, you know, eventually we get some moves to see what the players decide to do. Now we have a Queen's Indian setup here. I think that's what it is here, with the black bishop going on the queen side being fianchettoed. And the knight jumps in. Now, if we go back here, most players here would not play knight e4. It is a move, but this position has been reached almost 3,000 times in the database I'm looking at, and most players decide to go for this d5 line. d5, and then we could get something like this with the pawn being traded in the center, and, you know, white could get this with the b file, and black develops castles. White gets a very nice bishop and queen battery going on with possible, you know, e4, e5 ideas. The knight could jump in. The center is well defended. The bishop is flexible, you know, where it wants to develop. White can castle, bring the rooks to the center of the board, and, you know, we could get something like this where black has, you know, some bishops, some bishops, of course. Black has a pretty active bishop targeting white's center, and white is probably going to try and get some sort of something going on. That's my understanding looking at this position. Pretty balanced. But instead of d5, Fabi decides to play this knight e4, which is the 1, 2, 3, fourth most popular move in this position. Still played, but not as common, as I said. And we have a trade of knights in the center of the board. Magnus playing e3 to solidify the center here, temporarily making his dark squared bishop quite sad because it's locked within the pawn chain. But that's okay, because we're going to trade the light squared bishops, which, you know, technically that was white's good bishop because the pawns are all on dark squares and is now left with a bad bishop. But, I mean, black also just lost a bishop that had moved 1, 2 times already. 3 once it was traded. So white just gets an activated queen out of that. And, black does have some light squares that, would love a bishop to monitor. But hey, let's keep going. We have castles from both sides, d6 here, and b4. Magnus playing pretty actively here, pushing the b pawn to b4 and playing, rook d1 and bishop b2. Now, Fabi tries to start chipping away. He does not like that Magnus is taking all of this space because, well, look at this. You're just creating this giant wall and you're going to try and slowly push it towards your opponent and just push them off the board. And Fabi is not interested, right? When you play like this with black, right? You play like this where you have no pawns actually past the 6th rank. You're going to have to strike at some point, right? And this looks like a very natural place to try and create a pawn break. Because if you try to play in the center, well, white is a bit stronger in the center right now, yeah? Maybe you want to play this at some point if you bring the rook and you can get something. I don't know. I don't know how to play chess. But instead, Fabi decides to play on the A file. So he pushes, and now we've got some rooks having a staring contest. And he looks at me, and I look at him, and he looks at me, right? And it just goes back and forth for eternity. And then, the queen slides over to b8. Now, the black queen in this game is a little bit silly. I also forgot that I made myself coffee. I had a little donut mug. Hey, this will be a good time for a break here while I sip my coffee. If you haven't already, make sure you like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. Trying to grow this channel here. If you like the way I explain chess, why not subscribe and watch more of it? Anyway. Queen b8. The black queen in this game is very silly. And why is that? Well, it just kind of is a pendulum going back and forth, and we'll see what I mean here. So white plays queen e4, and we have d5. So white was trying to get some, pressure going over here on the a8 square, something like that. Maybe push this and get some, something. And, you've got the rook on the d file as well to support this d pawn push. But we have d5 from black saying, nah. I'm going to push d5. I pushed a5. I'm going to push d5, right? And the point is, it looks like you're losing a pawn, right? It looks like this. And that's how you and I would play chess and be like, oh, dang it, I lost a pawn. All right, we'll attack the queen and we'll kick it back. And then, we'll trade rooks because why hold the tension? And then, you'd get something like this if we were playing. But, these players are a little bit stronger than you and I. So Fabi had instead planned this knight f6 to kick the queen back and then recapture the pawn here. And, position is fairly balanced. I do like white's position a little bit more, but again, it is balanced because white does have this weak b4 pawn that the dark squared bishop is targeting. But white has eyes on this c7 pawn. It is backwards here, I believe. It would be the correct term because it can't really advance too far, and you've got eyes on it. Maybe the rook, right, and the knight can jump in, take advantage of the weak c6 square, or maybe even get into d7 if you're feeling a bit despicable. But the dark squared bishop for white is pretty sad, right? It's, like I said, the bad bishop in these types of positions where you have pawns on dark squares and a dark squared bishop because you're just trapped in a cage, right? Whereas black's bishop is a bit more active, has a clear target, can maybe get around this way, push this, right? And you've got the queen battery to the h2 pawn, something like this, right? So Magnus decides to play active. The bishop is not going to get active anytime soon, right? So the knight needs to, lift its weight and jumps the knight into e5, activating Magnus, Fabi putting pressure on that knight here, but b5. b5 allows white to solidify that c6 square, frees the c7 pawn from moving, right? Now it really is a backwards pawn, and also opens up the possibility of trading off the dark squared bishop, which white would probably like to do because, like I said, black's dark squared bishop is pretty active, much more active than white's, right? So maybe someday white would like to trade this off. Now, like I said, the black queen, bit of a pendulum in this game, just goes back and forth. It went to b8 for what? Just to go back to e8? And now look at this. Magnus says, that's dumb. You're wasting time because I get this, right? Look at the queen. Look at the queen. It goes to b8, to e8, to a8, back to e8, right? Look at that. It's crazy. Because Magnus saw, okay, let's look at this position here. Imagine this, but with these rooks just gone. Poof, out of the board, right? White has an active rook on the a file, the only open file. And, you get the exact same position. So that's what he does. He just kicks the queen around and takes the open file, right? So now it looks like, well, it doesn't look like it is a threat for, black to take this b5 pawn. I'm pretty sure. I don't see how white could respond if white does nothing. Yeah, just queen takes b5. So white offers a queen trade. White offers that queen trade because if you take, the knight is just going to get in. And you've got that c6 square under lock, right? Because the dark squared bishop can't touch the knight or the pawn. And this knight doesn't have a real easy way to contest the knight on c6, right? How are you going to do that? I don't even see, you'd have to like wrap around like this or something ugly like that, right? Like, how are you going to do it? Whereas white is just going to, again, trade off the dark squared bishop. And then once that happens, right, let's say black does nothing, you're just going to play like bishop a3 maybe. And, well, here it's bad because of rook a8, but imagine that we get something like this, where you just get super active, right? And you're going to play rook c8 here? You really going to do that? You're going to play rook I mean, I guess it kind of locks it up because white's rook is stuck here, so maybe you drop back anyway, and you try to push like f3, e4, and bring your king as well. And it's balanced, but, I mean, hey, this knight is looking pretty good, right? But let's go back. Fabi declines the queen trade and instead goes queen e7. But now Magnus gets active. The rook going into a7 here, putting more pressure on the c7 pawn and also pins the pawn, right? So we're pinned here, right? So Fabi advancing on the king side, trying to take some space and get something going. Magnus says, no, thank you. We're going to stop that right there. So the rook gets into the party. The queen drops back. Queen e6, okay? And there's the knight going into c6. A very nice outpost for the knight there, supported by the pawn and freezing the c7 pawn even further. Okay, the rook, we have some maneuvering, and there's that bishop a3, right? The dark squared bishop wants to trade itself off. So the knight jumps in, getting active. Magnus immediately trades those bishops and drops the knight back here and forcing Fabi to defend this, right? The knight moves out of the way to put pressure on the c7 pawn. The rook has to defend. Now Magnus pushes f3. He didn't have to do that. He did not have to push f3. He could have played something like queen a1 right away. But then maybe something like queen f6. Maybe he was, not looking forward to dealing with this. I mean, I don't know, maybe you can push f3 now, but, the knight goes back to d6 and is maybe going to get in here, and you've weakened your king now, right? You have to worry about this kind of stuff. So Magnus decides to play f3 first, inviting the knight in. Then plays queen a1. We have f6. The knight drops back here temporarily. h4 solidifies the knight on the g6 square, which, could, or g3 square, could cause some problems in the future, but for now, there's no immediate threat. So the king walks up to f2 to kind of solidify everything, defend, his position here. The king slides out of the way, and we've got some more maneuvering, and look at this. Look at this, knight e5. Fabi had voluntarily walked the king to h7, which is a bit of a more vulnerable square, right? Because of the open diagonal here. So Magnus is able to play this knight e5 discovered check, right? You can't take the knight because you're in check. So Fabi here finds one of the only moves. There are two moves in this position that do not lose for black. You can either play f5 to block the check, but then the knight is still really strong here and on c6, right? It can infinitely jump back and forth here, and, you get this queen c6, right? And you get the queen trade. This pawn is weak, and, we've already kind of looked at a position similar to that. Or, after knight e5 check, you play what Fabi played. Knight e4 check. Look at that. Responding to a discovered check with your own check to block that check, and you're sacrificing the knight temporarily. It's not really a sacrifice because you take, right? And now the check is still blocked by your own pawn. So now you get to take the knight, and you get this pawn cube in the center, right? And you calculate that white is going to take on d5 with check. You're going to push e4 to block. The king is going to have to move because you're threatening some like queen g3 stuff possibly. So you move out of the way. Then you recapture the d5 pawn. And now you get the c pawn falling off the board, but you win the b5 pawn. And now what the heck is going on, right? See, Fabi had most likely, here, let me find the position again, excuse me. Knight e5. Yeah, we got something. Let's just scroll through real quick. Okay. In this position, Fabi had probably calculated knight e4. Okay, he's going to take, and then I'm going to take his knight, and then he's probably going to take with check, and I'll push e4. The king's probably going to have to move because I'm threatening some queen g3 stuff. And then once the king moves, I'll retake here on d5, and then he'll probably take the pawn on c7. We'll trade, and then I get to take his pawn on b5. And it's an equal material. I've got to pass b pawn, and I can probably hold the draw in the queen endgame. Is probably what he thought, right? Let's go forward. Let's get back to that position right here. It is balanced. He's right. But he immediately blunders. Immediately blunders. Here he had to play queen d3 to keep an eye on the white pawns, and then you're going to escort the pawn this way instead of being in front of your pawn, right? You have to go to d3 so that if white starts doing stuff like this, taking the h4 pawn, giving some checks, winning the b6 pawn, you get to take on e3. That's the thing. You get to take on e3 with check, and then you've got your e pawn, and you can force a perpetual here, right? But if you go to b1, check, the king just moves, and then you try to push b5, that's not going to work because you're not eyeing that e3 pawn. So you get this all the same. And here black could have held on by going to g8 instead, in which case we would have had something like maybe the pawn pushing. Now you waste a move, right? You have to make up the move that you could have done earlier. And, we could get something like this, where the pawn gets really close. You take with check, and, you get a position like this, where white is 2 pawns up. It's much worse for black. There's probably some better lines you could have gone for as black after playing king g8, but he plays king g6, and that's just not going to cut it because the pawn just goes. And if you had a queen on d3, you would have been able to take that. But now it just goes, and you have to now waste a move going back to d3, but queen g4, check, check. We get enough checks, and the pawn just makes it through. You can try to push your b pawn, but yeah, d7. There's no way to stop the queen. So black resigns, and Magnus Carlsen, again, not expected. Very shocking that the GOAT from Norway wins Norway Chess. But hey, if you made it to the end of the video, as always, I'd like to thank you. Check out some other videos that I've got. I've covered a few Norway Chess rounds here. And make sure you comment below with your thoughts on this game, that daily puzzle I showed earlier. Let me know if you were able to solve that one. It's a pretty cool one, I have to say. Well, I've wasted enough of your time. Have a great rest of your day, guys.